Hello summoners and welcome to another ProGuides Best Champions to Main video, now on patch 10.10. These champions are all about high performance with low ban rates that are unlikely to get nerfed in the immediate future. The most reliable picks in the game that are the most worthy of investing your time in. Before we get started though, our question of the day is, which champion do you think is canonically the weakest in the lore? I personally think Teemo is the least powerful being on the roster, but even he has stealth tactics and poison. Let us know your answers in the comments below or hop into our Discord to discuss it with your fellow community members. We have all kinds of conversations happening there daily. Now, without further delay, let's get right into it. Maokai is our first top laner for 10.10, and it seems like he's too deeply rooted in the top lane meta to go anywhere. Maokai is just a super tanky champion that refuses to die thanks to his passive sustain. Riot tried to nerf him last patch, but it just didn't do the job. Maokai's too overloaded with CC. His Q has a knockback and slow, which is good for trading or for peeling carries. His W lets him go untargetable while he travels to an enemy and roots them in place, and his E lets him ward off enemies with his saplings. Maokai's ultimate on top of everything is devastating for teamfights and lets him both engage them and disengage them at a distance. It seems like Riot doesn't know how to properly deal with him, so play him before they figure out how to nerf this absolute titan. Volibear is our second top laner for 10.10, and while this is most likely due to his independent strength in the top lane as a juggernaut, it's also because his time with us is limited. Volibear is due for his rework soon, so you have to play the current iteration of him while you still can. Luckily, he's still strong, so you can create some good memories with all that power before he storms off into the sunset. Volibear's Q is great for running down his enemies and starting fights. Once he's flipped them, his W's attack speed growth lets him go toe-to-toe with most enemies in the game, especially with the damage on its active. If they try to dash away, his E can interrupt them midair and let him continue the fights while he activates his R for the extra lightning damage. If he gets too low, his passive kicks in and heals him through whatever damage the enemy is dishing out. Our third top laner for 10.10 is Nasus. Nasus is pretty strong in general, but he's exceptionally strong in lower elo where players don't know how to punish his weak early game hard enough and can't close games out before he gets a chance to stack up and become the raid boss. Even in higher ranks though, Nasus is a pretty decent choice against top laners who lack the damage to get through his passive sustain. His Q is an empowered auto attack that gains stacks of damage when it last hits an enemy. This damage stacks as many times as Nasus can do it, which is what makes him such a late game threat. Nasus's W is a point and click that slows its target's move speed and attack speed by an increasing amount over time, which lets him chase down targets and smack them with his Q. Nasus's E is a magic circle that deals a bit of magic damage, but more importantly, it shreds the armor of his enemies inside of it, letting him do even more damage with the rest of his kit. If things get rough, Nasus just presses his ultimate, lets him grow in size, he gains tank stats, a damage over time aura, and an increased attack range, making him a formidable enemy to take down. And in case you missed any of those item builds, we'll put those back on the screen for you right now. Xin Zhao is our first jungle pick for 10.10. After receiving buffs to both him and Phase Rush, he's been doing pretty damn well without also attracting a high ban rate just yet. Xin Zhao's abilities as an early jungle skirmisher are also unmatched, and as such, he can set most enemy junglers incredibly behind. When he's hunting his enemy down, his passive sustain is essential for keeping his health bar topped off. Once he has an enemy in his sights, his W can slow an enemy from range enough for him to follow up with his E dash and get on top of them. Once he's there, he can activate his Q to empower his next 3 attacks and knock them up on the third. If a fight gets too hairy, his ult swipes away any threat around him and grants him a zone of invincibility from anyone outside of it. Typically, Xin takes Hail of Blades for the extra power it gives him in the early game, but if you're in a game where your opponent is especially slippery, Phase Rush can sometimes be a better option to help him stick onto your targets. Trundle is our second pick for 10.10's best jungle mains. Tanks are back in style in multiple lanes, and Trundle thrives on being able to steal tank stats for his own. Even without tanks though, Trundle is still a formidable fighter. His Q is an empowered auto attack reset that lets him take a bite out of the enemy's damage and their health bar. Trundle's W conjures up a big zone of his domain where he gets a big surge of movement speed and attack speed. This is useful for chasing enemies down or for establishing favorable turf for a fight. His E's Pillar of Ice is great for blocking off escape paths or preventing people from chasing him. Since it's terrain, it can even be used to bump people out of dashes or ability channels if you time it just right. His ulti drains tank stats off of an enemy of his choosing, which is why Trundle has such favorable matchups into most tanks. Once he has their stats, he's free to lay down the hunt. Warwick is our third jungle pick for 10.10, and he's been solid pretty much all season. Warwick is a sustain-based brawler who's particularly adept at winning early fights before people have the damage to outdo his sustain. His passive gives his auto attacks bonus magic damage and healing, and when this gets paired with the heal from his Q's chomp ability, aside from just healing him, his Q can also be held down to dash through to the other side of his target, even if they activate a dash. Warwick's W lets him follow blood trails of low health enemies, or he can activate it to zone in on whichever enemy is closest in the area. Once he's tracked someone down, he can activate his E to reduce the damage he takes from them, then reactivate it to fear any enemies in proximity of him. If he needs to finish off a distant enemy, or even make a sudden entrance into a lane for a gank, his ulti lets him leap forward with a range that increases based on his movement speed. Whichever enemy he comes into contact with during his ulti gets suppressed and clawed at for a few seconds, making it a very powerful gank tool. And here are those jungle builds for you one more time. Our first mid laner of patch 10.10 is Annie. Annie is a burst mage who does well with making picks and dropping her stun in crucial moments of teamfights. Annie's passive makes it so that every 4th spell she casts readies a stun that will apply on anyone her next spell hits. Her Q is a point-and-click fireball that refunds mana when it's used to last hit a target, which includes minions. And this makes her lane farming incredibly beginner-friendly, and it's a good way to charge the passive without draining her mana. Annie's W is a cone of flame that hits multiple enemies, making it a good backup option for the use of her stun when Tibbers isn't available. Her E is by far one of the most underappreciated abilities in the game, but the defensive stats and free thorn mail it offers, plus the movement speed, make it a valuable tool in her kit to approach her victims. Annie's ulti Tibbers summons her demonic bear and does a huge burst of damage upon its arrival. After Tibbers is summoned, it deals burn damage to any enemies nearby, especially after her buffs this patch. Twisted Fate is our second mid laner for 10.10. TF has received a handful of buffs in the last few patches, and we fully expect him to regain his status as a mid lane centerpiece. With TF's global presence and nearly unmatched ability to win his side lanes, he's a great champion to main. Twisted Fate uses his Q's card throw to clear waves quickly and poke his lane opponent so he can roam to the side lanes with his ulti. Once he starts the ulti channel and reveals all the enemies on the map, he can start his W's card shuffle and either lock in its slow, stun, or bonus damage before he reactivates the ulti and teleports in for the gank. TF's E isn't the most overt ability on the planet, but the attack speed it offers lets him trade a bit more impactfully in the laning phase, and put out a bit more damage in teamfights. He does take a lot of practice to utilize well, but he's a great tool to have in your arsenal. Orianna will be our third mid laner for 10.10. Orianna is a staple of the mid lane and never really goes out of style, but right now she's doing especially well. Her damage has gone unchecked for a while, whereas other popular mids that counter her have been nerfed. Orianna works by moving her ball around a teamfight to apply certain effects, and her Q is what lets her reposition it. Anything the ball collides with during its travel takes a chunk of damage. Once the ball is where she wants it, she can use her W to slow and damage enemies, or speed up her allies. Orianna's E lets her move the ball to either herself or her allies, granting them a shield. Orianna's ulti, however, is what makes her such a steady mid laner. Orianna uses her Q to position the ball in the middle of as many enemies as possible. Then, she ultis to pull them all in toward it and deal a huge chunk of damage and follow it up with her W's damage for even more burst. The mid lane build should be back up on your screen for the final time now. Jhin is our first bot lane carry to main on 10.10, and he's a great choice for any AD carry players who do well with positioning, but maybe aren't so hot with their mechanics. Jhin's 4-shot mechanic means you don't have to do quite as much micro work to put out your damage, and you can instead focus your efforts on firing slugs into your enemy's skulls. Aside from Jhin's bursty autos, he's actually a low-key utility carry. Jhin's W is a long-range skill shot that lets him lock down any targets that have recently taken damage from him or his allies. His E traps are great for controlling objectives, and his Q's bouncing grenade is a little extra pop of damage. Jhin's ult is generally thought of as a finishing move since it's a long-ranged execute, but it can also be used for its slow to make picks and start fights. Ziggs is our second bot lane carry for 10.10. Now, while Ziggs isn't exactly a traditional bot lane champion, this bursty artillery mage scales pretty damn well, and also has access to some of the most obnoxious zone control in the game. Ziggs' Q is a bouncing bomb that deals AoE damage, with a range that outdoes that of most AD carries. His W's satchel charge knocks himself and his enemies away from its center, which makes it a great tool for self-peel. And as an added bonus, it can also execute turrets once they're low enough. His E's minefield is yet another useful tool for self-peeling and zone control. And as the final cherry on top, he even has a semi-global ultimate he can use to blow up teamfights or correct side lane waves in his favor. Important note though, if you end up being the only source of AP damage on your team, you're better off taking Gathering Storm over Scorch so you can be a bit more impactful in the late game and a bigger late game threat. Twitch is our final bot lane carry for 10.10, and for once, he smells like success instead of rotten eggs and disease. Well, he still smells like that too, but hey, what can you do? Twitch is a bot lane hyper carry, takes his wins by ambushing his opponents and then blasting them with his high damage crits. His Q lets him enter stealth to sneak up on unsuspecting enemies, and once he has an angle, he can strike. Usually Twitch likes to break stealth by tossing his W's Venom Cask to apply extra poison stacks and slow down any enemies that try to approach him. After tossing the cask, he can activate his ulti to increase his auto attack range and attack damage to start shredding enemies with his penetrating auto attacks. Once he's spread his disease to max stacks, he can pop his E to burst enemies he's afflicted. It can be hard to get Twitch out of lane phase, but once he has items, he's incredibly hard to deal with, especially if he has an enabling support behind him to add to his power. And go on ahead and take an extra peek at those bot lane builds. Our first support for 10.10 is Janna, one of the best healing supports in the game. Janna is an enchanter who keeps enemies off her teammates so that they can continue dishing out damage with impunity. Her Q is a chargeable tornado that knocks enemies up in a line to delay them. Her W passively gains her a large increase in movement speed to help with her rotations, but she can use the active for a point and click slow and also poke damage as well. Janna's E is an enormous shield, but even more than just preventing enemy damage, it also gives a slight boost in attack damage to whoever she applies it to. As if all this CC wasn't enough protection, Janna also gets an ult that knocks enemies away and then heals nearby allies for a few seconds as long as she keeps channeling it. For as useful as she is and as high as her pick rate is, she has a surprisingly low ban rate, so you'll get a lot of value for learning her. Maokai is our second support for 10.10. Just like in the top lane, he's super tanky and has a well-rounded kit of CC. His Q's knockback is great for protecting carries, as is the root that comes with his W. His saplings can keep watch over any gank attempts on the bot lane, and his ulti can set the pace of any engagements to suit his needs. While Maokai makes a good support for just about any bot lane carry, he's exceptionally well matched with a starving Senna. We can just build like a normal top laner and be even tankier than regular support items would allow him to be. And finally, our third support for 10.10 is Nami. Nami is a well-rounded support with very few bad matchups. She's an enchanter, but she has a good mix of poke, healing, and crowd control. Her W is a point-and-click stream of water that bounces between foes and allies to do damage and heal, respectively. Trading with this ability lets her be one of the most effective lane bullies of any support, and buffing herself or her ADC with her ease bonus damage and slow makes trading with her an even taller order. Once the slow is applied, she can land her Q's bubble stun with ease, and if there are too many threats approaching, she can use her ulti's tidal wave to knock them up while she makes her escape. Alternatively, if she's looking to start a fight, her passive gives her allies movement speed whenever her spells touch them, so the tidal wave can be a good engage tool as well. Finally, the support builds are up on your screen one last time, so you guys can check them out. Thanks for watching, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this video along with the rest of our patch 10.10 series. Once again, let us know in the comments which champion you think is the weakest in the lore so we can hit you with the fresh hot heart react. We really do love hearing from you. See you guys next time. Good luck on the Rift, and please wash your hands.